Hi, I'm Addison K. Witt, Poet Laureate of the Defense of Democracy and host of this podcast. The attack on America's public school system isn't slowing down, but neither are we. Here you'll meet authors, educators, students, and defenders from across the country who aren't just sounding the alarm, they're answering it. You'll be informed, you'll be moved, and if we've done our job right, you'll be ready to stand with us. This is the Defense of Democracy podcast. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast. I'm your host, Addison K. Witt. Now, most weeks on this show, we're talking to people on the front lines, fighting book bans, defending honest education, pushing back against extremism, and keeping our democracy alive through daily acts of courage. But today, the urgency is different, because behind every political battle, behind every policy fight, there are people quietly struggling to survive their own lives. Over the years, I've lost friends to suicide. In fact, recently I was in London working on a project when I learned of a longtime friend's suicide. Now, I am sometimes called late at night by friends who are overwhelmed, ashamed, or unsure if they can continue. Their reasons are different: heartbreak, financial loss, addiction, depression. But the ache is the same. I believe that when a democracy is unwell, when people feel disconnected, isolated, or invisible, these personal crises become collective crises. So today, we begin a new series, a conversation about suicide, mental health, and the covenant we hold with one another as human beings. And full disclosure, when I first moved to Dallas from Los Angeles, I found my way to First Presbyterian Church, where I first encountered today's guest, not just as a pastor, but as someone who speaks deeply about covenant, community, and the commitments that carry us through our darkest hours. I'm grateful he's here for this conversation. Please welcome Amos Disasa. Thank you for joining me in this particular conversation. It is a pleasure to have you here today, Amos.
Good to be here with you, Addison.
Thank you. Before we get into the discussion of suicide, tell us about your work as a pastor and leader. I imagine you have to discuss a lot of dark days and feelings that people have.
Yeah, the work of a pastor is one of the strangest, weirdest jobs I think anybody can hold. It's requires organizational competencies. You got to be able to, lead people, manage people. You got to be able to speak in public. You got to be able to raise money. You got to be able to write well. You've got to also, you got to be able to relate to people personally, offer counsel. You have to have opinions about just about anything that's happening in the world at any point, So it's in some respects an impossible job for anyone to do all those things very well. But I've served here, as you know. This is a church that is it's been around for a while, 160 years here in downtown Dallas, and we had a lot of stuff going on. Thankfully, I've got a great team of people I work with here, so I don't have to do each of those things day to day. I spend most of my time preparing for Sundays and for the sermon homily that I give each Sunday, which is the moment at which the whole church comes together to listen for a proclamation from God. We are people of the Word, as Presbyterians are, so we are intently focused on listening to, learning from, and being curious about God's Word. And so I have that particular honor and distinction of being able to speak first amongst our community and begin the conversation each week. So that's where I spend most of my time.
The part of having opinions that you mentioned, having opinions about everything that's happening in the world today. There is so much happening in the world today, and it must be an incredible fine line to walk, because while having opinions, everyone has an opinion, and everyone's looking for leadership to help them make sense of their opinions. So you have to be so connected to what's happening, what's going on, and yet I imagine to some degree also disconnected from it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, um, that's a good point. And I have to read widely. That's so I have to keep up. I don't have really the option of not paying attention to the news. It is, it would be professional malpractice for me to just, tune out from what's happening in the world. But at the same time, there is, because of technology and the internet, we've got access to so many opinions, and everybody's got something to say about something. So I have to be very curatorial in what I choose to read and who I choose to pay attention to, and very intentional about uh, you know exposing myself to opinions that I don't necessarily agree with, and just to continuously challenge my own state of mind and interrogate it. So, the work of being a pastor really is about being a proclaimer in the public square. You are speaking some kind of truth, that you assert or believe in, or maybe sometimes some question about some other truth that somebody's holding. You're speaking that into the public. And everything has changed since the pandemic, especially for churches like ours, mainline churches, post-people churches, didn't really have to think too hard about having making our services available online. And
Yeah,
then all of a sudden the pandemic hit and we had to figure out how to do church, live stream church and all that. And nothing's really, since then, it is just an expectation. In just a few short years, people have come to expect that there is an archive of everything that has never been preached online, available instantly, for each church. And so that's a new phenomenon for us. And that has changed, as I talk to my pastor colleagues around the country, it does change your own preparation. As what you were saying is not just for that moment, that preaching moment, but it will also be memorialized and searchable, into perpetuity. How long? Who knows how long that one word I spoke into this one particular moment will be available for anybody to listen to at any point, that maybe
right.
did not even have any real connection to our local community here, and may not know or have any sense of any reference about what was happening in that church on that Sunday that made
Hmm.
him say that thing, in that way. So the proclamation is much more public, and so necessarily it's more fraught necessarily with the potential for misunderstanding or potential for miscommunication, mishearing. So that is a new phenomenon for us.
It and very interesting one, and it really brings up so many questions I have. But why don't I start here with something I heard you discuss think over a month ago, several weeks certainly, about covenant, and you're talking about how different things are today. As I've expressed, I've had a number of friends who have committed suicide for many years, friends from college, um, um, even high school, and I've become somewhat of a person that people contact and talk. And the most important thing I've always found is listening, and that's how I'm able to be present. But let's start with how you understand covenant, the promises, responsibilities, and sacred commitments we hold toward one another as human beings.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think you're referring to a sermon I think I preached early in November. And the focus of that sermon was the covenant that the Israelites, that God was making with the Israelites, and I was comparing that to a text from Acts 2 and the covenant that the early apostles had with each other. And a distinction that I made early in that sermon is that covenant is different than following orders. So keeping a covenant and following orders are two different things. So a covenant is not necessarily, doesn't have to be in between two parties that are, equality or fairness in the agreement is not the purpose of the covenant. Um, covenant is not about controlling the actions of each party that are part of the covenant. Covenants are what sets them apart is that you're tying each other's like future together. You're weaving your stories one with the other. And yet, it's necessary that you be distinct, that there's two distinct parties. Otherwise, the concept of covenant dissolves if you're just talking about becoming one unit. So there is that ongoing tension between how are we different from each other, different enough that this covenant actually has meaning. We are distinct and we recognize that distinction. And yet, we are knitting together our future, and making promises to each other, that are eternal. And that's another important distinction with a covenant is, you're not talking about a temporary, treaty that can be broken if one party doesn't comply. The nature of a covenant is that it's eternal. It's not temporary. As the Bible says, it endures to 1,000 generations. So covenant is, for me, I think, a very helpful way, or I should say, offers a helpful frame for the season that we're in, as we think about what the meaning of friendship is, the meaning of marriage, the meaning of the relationships between parents and their children. All relationships these days are fraught with real peril, as we try to understand in this very complicated, complex world that we live in right now. Relationships between bosses and their employees, relationships between insiders and outsiders, immigrants and people, native-born people. So as we navigate those relationships, I think it would be helpful for us to have some kind of enduring, vision of what healthy covenants look like and feel like, and that. So that's kind of what I was trying to get to, I think, with that sermon that you heard. Yeah.
Thank you. For me, I zeroed in on a couple of things. Certainly, a relationship with our supreme being, our God, and then the covenant with self and the commitment that you have. And then, of course, I think from there I went out into my relationships. Now, friendship has always been incredibly important to me, and I've always felt strongly that I know how to be a very good friend, and I value that part of who I am, and I know that is why people reach out to me because I also am a good listener, and I do my best to connect when people are sharing whatever parts of their lives. It's very important to me, and that has been, part of my personality for a long time. And so that's where I really focused in on the relationships. And I oftentimes hear people say, oh, well, that's rare. Most people wouldn't do that. And I always think, well, that's awfully sad. And you have relationships with people that when they're in crises, and I'm not talking about necessarily money crises or people needing money or things of that nature. I'm talking about really their emotional well-being. And so it's rare. People at least feel that it's rare for others to be there for them. When I know that many people feel disconnected, overwhelmed, and even hopeless, do you see this as a kind of breaking of a covenant when we that we have with ourselves, with community, um, or is this something larger that we're trying to do? Does that make sense? What I'm asking here?
Mm. I think so. Yeah, I've been recently very inspired by a book I read by Su, which he's a New Yorker staff writer, and he wrote a book, Stay True. I think he won the Pulitzer Prize a couple years back. It's a memoir about his college years in Berkeley, and then also a friendship that he had with one of his college classmates and roommates. And early in that book, there he talks about some lectures that I think French philosopher Jacques Derrida gave on friendship years back, maybe in the early 1980s, um, and he pointed out a distinction that Derrida made about friendship, and he said that that friendship's driver is not the pursuit of someone who is just like you, but a friend is someone who would choose knowing rather than being known. Someone who would choose knowing rather than being known. So that I think is an important point to clarify about how how covenant and friendship, the ideas of covenant and friendship, are related. Both are personal; they're not impersonal relationships. And the personal aspect of those is that each party in that covenant or each person in that friendship seeks not just to be known, but seeks knowing as well, is in a relationship with another person who is innately mysterious, and full of contradictions, and experiences suffering, and whose life story ebbs and flows, who is dynamic, is an organic being that's necessarily living and dying all at the same time, So that takes a great deal of commitment and sacrifice to engage in that kind of relationship where it's not just, I'm going to tell you what's going on in my life, but I desperately want to know what's happening, who you are. Who are you? How did you get here? Where are you going? And if given the choice between you knowing who I am or me knowing who you are, I would rather know who you are than you know who I am. That is what sustains a friendship, And friendship might be a good model for us instead of, thinking about the health of the country or society or, the goodwill of all people in the beloved community of God throughout the whole world. If we begin just with how do we model good friend, not just model, but how do we execute on our vision or our imagination of a good friendship? What does it mean to be a good friend? I think we would benefit greatly from that. And
I
I
agree
think,
with that.
yeah,
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think that's an exceptional point that you've made there, and something that's super important because, um, and this particular time of year, for instance, is often fraught with a lot of anxiety, loneliness, and feeling that uh, there's a lack, right? Lack of friendship, lack of people in your life who care for you. In terms of struggles, I want to talk about that a little bit. So, in your work as a pastor, what are some of the struggles people carry that most of us never see? What sits beneath the surface of someone who may be approaching despair, particularly as we go into this time of year during the holidays?
yeah, uh, I, I, we're in Dallas here, big city, and things move quickly, things move fast here. Um, it's easy for people to get left behind. A lot of people are lonely. A lot of people are not just alone, which is not a problem. They're also lonely, desperate. Um, not for companionship day to day, but just desperate for someone to remember that they are they're present, that they're a person. We can really survive almost anything, if we've got people around us. There are a lot of lonely people, man. Like I said, Dallas moves fast. I mean, it's a very ambitious city here that we live in. It's not unlike, it's really an exemplar for, how we understand, or think of, conceive of the American dream. You come to Dallas, it's like one of the easiest places, to achieve it. Whatever we feel, however much credence or value we assign to that whole notion of the American dream, Dallas is the place to do it. And but there are people here that are, I would say, yeah, very lonely. But I don't think that's atypical. I think also one thing that we must pay attention to is I encounter people that they are on the other, like they're closer to death than they're closer to their death than they are to their birth,
Mhm.
and they're experiencing a great deal of loss. And the loss sometimes, typically, it's not the material loss that really challenges people's. Um, it is the loss of relationships, the loss of purpose, the loss of really um, uh, ability, as well, cognitive, physical abilities. It's the loss of um, influence. It is the loss of uh, um, like sense of place, a connection to a home. So, uh, we talk about resiliency for kids a lot. I mean, in adolescence, and I think resiliency for people who are navigating their way through midlife and into the, their senior years is something that is a challenge as well. And we don't aging is something that we do everything we can to sort of avoid it, Um, and there are entire, markets that exist, and people have made careers out of helping people uh, evade, their death. But it's not something we can deny, and we don't do a good job talking about it. And I think that there is an existential kind of um, weight that I sense people carrying around, and I don't expect people to be excited about the fact that they're finally going to be in some, some eternal rest and peace. But at the same time, um, it's just not even something that we talk about.
Right.
Which, if there ever was, proverbial elephant in the room, that would always be it. What I've learned in my own work is that everybody's thinking about it all the time. They are,
Interesting.
you know, yeah, they're, and many of us orient our, thought patterns around, like, and we understand, really. We measure our life by like what we have lost, really, um, and measure ourselves against others by what we've lost. So we're all thinking about lost or death all the time, constantly. Not just
Interesting.
not just the fact it's happened in the past to us and we're going through some kind of grieving or trauma, but also that it's in front of us. I mean, and I I can attest to that in my own life. I've moved to Dallas 7 years ago, and these last 7 years for me, I left my hometown, and it's been a tremendous time here in Dallas with the faith community that I get to work with. But at the same time, I left behind childhood friends and family, sense of just being able to drive down the road and kind of know where all the potholes are, and
Right.
um, a smell, certain sounds, and so um, uh, and you moved here when I was 40, 38, 39 years old. One of the hardest things to do in life is to move to a new city and
Yes.
make friends as an adult. It is
Right.
so hard,
It is. It is.
especially for men as well. It's just
Yes.
hard. It's really hard for us to just make friends.
Right.
That's good. So I've grieved the loss of friends that are not dead, and they're available on the FaceTime and on email and all that stuff. But I think about them all the time. You know, so
I know what you mean. I thought about that some years ago when I wondered why it was so challenging. And part of what I assessed is that when you're younger in school and college, you're surrounded by so many people with similar interests, and you get to pick and choose, and you've got the energy for it. And as you progress and move on in life into careers and work, there are fewer people and opportunities, and you're hyper focused on the work that you're doing, and you don't, or family that you're building. And unless you are actively inserting yourself in environments where there are going to be other people, similar age and similar interests, that pool just shrinks and shrinks and over time.
Right.
It
Yeah.
almost feels like it doesn't exist
Yeah.
anymore, which is why I think community is, and
Mhm.
community, like for instance with First Presbyterian Church, I knew it was important for me coming to Dallas after many, many years, 30 something years returning here. All the friends I had then, everyone has gone, moved in different directions. And so one of the ways that we still find and build community is through the church or opportunities or service or
Mhm.
faith-based organizations, particularly when you're looking for a particular type of
Mhm.
relationships.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, the church has always been a gathering spot. I mean, for people, and it was normative, for you go to a new place, you're old school, man. Addison, you're old school talking to me. You come to a new city and you're like, let me find out where my church is, and you're like, the very first things you do. Most people don't do that anymore,
No.
so you're an outlier in that way.
Yeah.
And I've been a pastor for 20 years now. I mean, I am always so humbled and challenged by people who walk into a church. I'm an introvert through and through, man. It would be hard for me to go to a new church and just walk in and be like, "Hey, who are you? Hey, how's everybody?"
Yeah.
I would be it'd be very challenging for me to do that. So I'm always just amazed when new people come to our church, but that is, some of these cultural norms, these things that we all held in common, expectations that we had for each other about where we could meet, where we would be gathered. Um, it's those don't exist to the same degree with the
No.
same force as they did.
No.
Um, so voluntary member organizations like churches, they have the decline of those institutions, not just the institutions, but also the practice of participating in those institutions. And I shouldn't even just say practice, the discipline of doing it, of binding yourself in covenant with other people to form some kind of voluntary member organization, whether it's a bowling league or whether it's the PTA or whether it's, a church or labor union, you know, that's the erosion of that expectation has been perhaps one of the defining stories of the last 100 years in this country. Um, so we're gathering. We have many more connections and nodes of connection, but they are looser, flimsier nodes, and almost all of them are digitized. And
Right.
they exist, on the internet. And so it's much easier to get in touch and stay in touch with people. And yet, um, it embodied experiences, just being one to one in person with each other. It's tough, man, these days. It's tough.
It is. Well, one of the things you cannot digitize or is your feelings, right? How you feel. And for me, returning to Dallas in part was because I was confronting my own loss. My sister, who was had uh, MS for a number of years and a number of illnesses that ultimately led to her own death, her demise. And I knew that my family would require not only my strength and support, but outside of ourselves, we had to find community and make sure that we were part of people. Certainly, we have our faith, and we lean heavily into our faith and the relationship there. And with that are also people that embody a certain belief system and energy and way of operating in the world. And so I would need support as well so that I can be there for my family. And it just so happened that I found First Presbyterian. I thought the people there were amazing in just their energy and how they were so and are so welcoming, and I see that consistently there. I want to ask also from your experience when someone is struggling or hurting, we often don't know what to say. But from your perspective,
Mhm.
what actually helps someone who is struggling, and what are the well-intentioned things that can unintentionally cause harm?
Yeah. Um, I mean, uh, it is enough to say to someone, "I'm sorry you're going through this."
Mm.
Um, with authenticity, with integrity. If you can say that with integrity, um, then say that. Uh, um, and that means everything else that you might say after that can be captured in just that. I'm sorry. I am sorry. Number one, you're there to say it. You're present to say it. Number two, you noticed that they're going through something that demands others' sympathy. Uh, so yeah, to say I'm sorry you're going through it is enough. I don't, most people that are suffering, going through challenging times, most people in the moment are not looking for, theological like explanations that will, resolve any questions that they might have about why it's happening to them. We spend as preachers and people who think about the the paradox of being human, which is that you're going to die one day. So think about that all the time. Most of us, we think other people are thinking about this stuff all the time, or wondering why. Bad things happen to good people. Most people aren't really thinking about that. Most people, especially if they're going through a season of suffering, they're just muscling through it. They're going day to day, man. They're just trying to get to tomorrow. That's it. They don't have a long-term care plan for themselves. They're not at that place, yet. And once they get to that place, they can typically figure it out on their own, and they don't need us to, you know, do stuff. So I would say, I don't recommend books to people. Don't try to buy them books. If they're in an acute season of suffering, then most people don't, they don't
That's
want to.
hilarious. That is
Yeah,
so funny because I've been recommended so many books when you're going through something very
yeah, yeah.
challenging.
Those
I get a
books speak
lot of book
to us.
recommendations.
Yeah, I've had to learn this about myself because I used to do that all the time. And then I realized, like, wait, I read that book and it meant something to me when I was in a frame of mind or state of mind to really receive it and to hear it clearly.
Right.
'Cause I didn't read that in a moment of tremendous, like, great peril or, so, I have not, yeah. Other
There's
thing I
typically
would
a
just,
lot of also there's a lot of inner questions and inner turmoil, and I know that this is not necessarily related to suicide, but even when there's just tremendous loss, people start questioning God, questioning their faith, questioning what happens to you after death. Is that everything that I once believed, is that really real? It's up for question. And then people will say, "Oh, I've got an answer. Read this book."
yeah,
I don't want to read this book right now.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I want the fastest, easiest answer to help me
right.
alleviate the pain that I'm experiencing.
Yeah, yeah. And um, yeah, I don't, I think people are, some of the pain in those moments is connected to a question of whether or not it's okay for me to feel this. Can I feel this? You know,
Yeah. Yeah,
is it okay
exactly.
for me to feel very sorry for myself? Is it
Right.
okay for me to be angry, at whoever did this or took this from me? Or is it is it okay for me to feel as ashamed as I am about the fact that I haven't left my house in 7 days, and I've ordered Uber Eats like 32 times, Is it okay? And so it is a gift that we can offer and extend to people to say, like, this pain that you're feeling, this thing, this hurt, it is it is okay it's real. It's a real thing that's happening to you. You didn't make this up. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's not a result of something you did wrong. It's happening to you. Um, and it's yours. It's your own thing. Like, I mean, I can connect with it on some level, but so yeah, I think there's some aspect of, like, caring for people is just giving them permission to actually claim their pain, their suffering, their hurt, their grief as a very real thing that they don't need to, like, try to make go away, you know?
It is a very
Um,
real thing. And for people who have lost someone, for instance, there was a couple questions I had in terms of what do you say? And I know for myself, as I said previously, as many experiences as I've had, you still don't always know what to say. Usually, listening is very important. And what I will do if I've had a conversation with someone that is experiencing extreme despair and they
mm,
are talking about um, ending their life. Um, I will do the best I can over the phone, and as soon as I hang up with them, I typically will contact a helpline or a
yeah,
therapist and
absolutely.
walk through the process and go, "This is what's happening. I now need support, and I need to understand how to help this person forward." And that's been the approach that I've used for a number of years.
Yes,
Obviously, I've gained insight and it's something that is important to me. So I pursue knowledge so that I am able to help, and I'm grateful. There's a recent experience I mentioned to you previously of a friend I've been calling every single day, and we've had the conversation. Thank you. You have helped save my life because I've mostly just been on the phone listening
yeah,
and telling jokes, trying to get this person to think differently. I read a book by oh, what's his name? Vanderkolk. Oh, I can't think of his first name, but anyway, he's from Amsterdam, and the book was about we are what is it? Oh, the body keeps the score. Body keeps the
mm,
score is the
yes,
name of the
good
book,
book.
and it's a great book. I love the book, but it talked a lot about the grooves, neurological grooves in our brain that over time they become like ski slopes because those neutrons are lighting up in the same place every time with the same thoughts, and so it becomes automatic. However, you can change that by creating new thoughts. Well, it's very difficult to do in the moment,
Yeah,
and particularly when there's a pattern.
mhm,
Your brain is accustomed to going in that direction. And so you have to so when I'm in crises with a person, I focus on
mm,
changing
mm,
thoughts and talking about it openly so that the person knows what we are doing
mhm,
and know and understand that they have to be responsible for changing the way they think, uh, absent from me being on the phone with them or another person being with them. What are other, I guess, helpful tools that you would suggest from your point of view when you've been in crises with someone?
yeah, physical activity, I would say if you can be with someone, then go for a walk, you know? Um,
Yeah.
uh, I say that for myself as well, and sometimes typically, I mean, sometimes, yeah, a walk is sometimes all I need, to sort of reorient or, reset, my body so that it is in alignment with my heart, my intentions, my emotions, and so, yeah, going for walks, I'm inviting people to go on walks, even if it's just around the block or, um, I think that, that's helpful. I think, uh, um, changing environment, part of, inviting people to walk is to change their environment, so a lot of times
Mhm.
people who are in despair and in grief, they are stuck not just in, as you said, thought patterns, but also stuck in the same physical environment, they so getting them, encouraging them meet up in different places and get out and about. That's good as well. Um, uh, I there's some I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist. My life has benefited greatly, from relationships with therapists in the past, and so it's if there are things I don't try to do with people. It's like way
Yeah.
outside my area of expertise, and so oftentimes not just saying, hey, you should go see a therapist, but helping them. It's very hard for someone who's in a depressed state or anxious state or grieving state to do just the practical things to like make a phone call, check who's available, who does my insurance accept, who will accept my insurance,
Right.
that kind of stuff. So it's I think that that is something that we can do really if you've got a close relationship with someone who's going through stuff, is to not just say you should talk to someone, but let's talk through the steps, and let me help you make that connection as well.
It
Um, yeah, go
these
ahead.
are I was just gonna say these you're right. It is very challenging, and there's so much bureaucracy and red tape and procedures that you have to follow, and knowing what or how it is very challenging. I think it goes back, however, if friendship could become a national pursuit and
Yes.
understanding how to do that, then there are experiences and behaviors that accompany being a friend that everyone can figure that part out. Not everyone knows how to be a great friend, but you certainly can learn how to be a better friend.
Yes.
And so I think that's important. I know that many listeners feel that the world, politically, economically, spiritually, is literally unraveling. Do you see a connection between this collective anxiety and the rise in despair that people are having from your own point of view?
I don't know, man. I go back and forth on this notion of like, is this an era of just chaos? Is something fundamental really broken, in the human experiment? I mean, are we talking systems level failure of civilization at this moment? What's actually the diagnosis, the analysis of like the assessment of this moment? I think is essential, and doing it in a clear headed way um, is really requires a lot of wisdom, knowledge of history, um, and also a like understanding of our own cognitive biases, all that kind of stuff. I think it's a fraught time, especially here. There are some challenges that are specific to to this era. I mean, I think there's some challenges to democracy, of course, and then AI is a new thing, and uh, it's growing inequality is, I think, perhaps the most persistent and sticky challenge right now, like that we've got to address. But I um I would not go so far to say that like this is a blip, you know, and we'll return to something normal. But I just don't think things have been that normal for a long time. I don't think this era that we're in really is all that different from. I think people who are in marginalized people, vulnerable people, have always found this world to be very um, uh, challenging to exist in. So um, I I think the that um, we may be questioning, uh, if we're going to pull through this. There's something about being like an American, that encourages you to just kind of default to like it's all going to be all right, And I think what might be broken right now is our
Right.
trust in that sort of posture, right? Where everything turns out okay eventually for America, you know.
The
And in
great
this moment,
American optimism.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I do think that, there was something about the election in November was just kind of like, whoa, wait a second. There's a vulnerability to our common sort of there's a of our kind of vision for America, that it's like, wait, this challenges this notion of like American exceptionalism. And I think that's where we're at right now. But you had to believe that America was exceptional in some way. That and that might be what 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 we actually need to interrogate in this moment. Not necessarily how do we put ourselves back together, but why did we ever think that we were immune to, or protected from? Just like you know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, we're going to wrap up here. I do know that statistically, when we look at the numbers according to the CDC and the NIH 2024, that over 49,000 Americans died by suicide in 2023, 1.7 million attempt suicide over that year. And our there's one death every 11 minutes, and someone is attempting suicide every 20 to 25 seconds. I think one of the things that was said in this conversation that I like very much is the idea of friendship and embodying that. And we are our neighbor's keeper. Obviously, since the world has evolved and grown, our communities, our neighborhoods are very different. You don't know everyone. You don't go knock on the door when someone new moves into the neighborhood anymore and take them the apple pie or whatever it is. We don't greet people in the same way. So there is a greater sense of isolation. We're on our technologies, on our phones, inside of our homes. Children don't run rampant on the streets any longer. So the neighbors are not responsible for the community children. All of those behaviors have evolved, and evolution is a part of the experience on planet Earth. So it's not necessarily that it is a bad thing, it is a different thing. And as we navigate through the changes of the world, we have to operate differently. 50,000 based on the numbers, total numbers of people in this country, doesn't seem like an extraordinary number. However, there are a number of people going through extraordinary circumstances. And to be there for each other, I believe, makes a better country, better nation, better
Yeah.
democracy, and a better community at large. If someone is listening right now and they're feeling that they can't go on, what would you want them to hear from you in this moment?
um that they're loved, that they're known by their creator, that they're not alone, um, uh, and that um, they don't have to be alone. There's another way to live in this world, and um, yeah, I and that we grieve with them, because it's not God's intention or God's plan that any of us should suffer alone. I do. I don't think God has set us up to avoid, or like off given us some promise to never have to suffer at all. But I mean, I do think that God's promise is that you won't have to do it by yourself. So
I love that, and I appreciate you saying that. For some reason, the Good Samaritan popped into my head when you mentioned suffering alone, that or suffering that you're not alone, that there's always someone there. It may not be the person you expect, or the timing may not be what you expect, but there's always someone or some opportunity there to assist you. Amos, this went much longer than I anticipated, but that means that we were having a great conversation. I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom, your clarity, and your heart.
Thank you.
Conversations like this remind us that our democracy is not only defended in courtrooms or classrooms and communities, it is defended in the private battles people fight every single day just to stay alive. If you want a healthy nation, in my opinion, you must also care for the health of the people inside it. To anyone listening who is struggling, you are not alone. And to anyone supporting someone in pain, your presence matters more than you know. Believe me. Here at Defense of Democracy, we believe that our collective well being is part of the fight for freedom, and this work doesn't happen without you. If this episode moved you, if you believe in protecting human dignity, honesty, education, and the right to live free from fear, please consider making an end-of-year donation. Every donation, large or small, helps keep this work going so we can stand together against the forces pulling our communities apart. You can give at defenseofdemocracy.org. Thank you for your support. Thanks for keeping this conversation going. I'm Addison Witt, Poet Laureate for Defense of Democracy. We'll see you next time.
Defense of Democracy is the only national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting our schools and libraries from attacks by anti-government extremist organizations like Moms for Liberty. We count on listeners like you to support our work. If you would like to make a tax-deductible donation to Defense of Democracy, please visit defenseofdemocracy.org and click support. 100% of your contribution helps our work, including the production of this podcast. If you are a business and would like to learn about corporate sponsorships of the podcast, which start at $250 per month, please contact info@defenseofdemocracy.org.